Welcome to Revolution Chronicles. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the hidden stories of our past. Tonight, we uncover a chilling secret from the heart of Frankfurt. In the dusty attic of an old townhouse, a locked trunk was found. Inside lay a skeleton still dressed in her wedding gown. Who was this forgotten bride? And why was she hidden away for more than a century? Frankfurt, Germany. The late 1970s. The city, like many others across Europe, was changing quickly. Steel, glass, and concrete rising where old timber-bird houses once stood. But deep inside the narrow lanes of the historic quarter, there still lingered echoes of an older time. Cobbled streets, sagging roofs, and quiet courtyards held stories that had been locked away for centuries. It was here, in one such crumbling townhouse, that a team of workers began their day. To them, it was just another renovation, another tired old property scheduled to be restored and made modern again. The air was thick with the smell of dust and wood rot. Hammer strikes echoed through the rooms. The plaster peeled off the walls like brittle skin in the attic low-roofed. Cramped and shadowed by slanted beams, the men began pulling apart old storage panels. Their task seemed routine, almost boring. A house this old often hid forgotten trunks, moth-eaten books, or rusted tools left behind by families long gone. But on this particular morning, something different emerged. Behind a wooden panel, sealed tighter than the rest, their crowbars struck something hollow. The sound rang sharply in the stillness. They pried the boards loose, one by one, until their lantern light revealed a large, dust-covered trunk. Its edges were iron-bound, its surface scratched and scarred with time. For decades, perhaps a century or more, it had rested undisturbed. The workers exchanged glances. Finds like this often meant valuable antiques, maybe silverware or old family heirlooms. They heaved the trunk forward, coughing as a cloud of dust rose around them. With a grunt, one of them forced the rusted latch open. The hinges groaned as the heavy lid creaked back, and then silence. The men froze. Their lanterns illuminated something that made their blood run cold. Inside the trunk lay bones. Human bones, arranged not in a jumbled heap, but in the unmistakable form of a person. The figure was curled slightly, knees drawn in, but still dressed. What struck them most was not only the skeleton itself, but the clothing. A gown. A bridal gown. The fabric, though yellowed and brittle with age, clung still to the delicate bones. Lace sleeves fell away in tatters, yet the outline of a dress remained. On the skull, fragile remnants of a veil rested, discolored but clearly once white. Even the shoes were there, still on the bony feet, though cracked and softened by time. One of the workers whispered, "Mein Gott." It's a bride. The attic seemed to grow colder. The image was so haunting, so unnatural, that the men backed away instinctively. Here, in this forgotten chest, was not a set of belongings, but the remains of a woman who had once prepared for marriage, her life locked away with her. News spread quickly through the neighborhood. Crowds gathered outside the townhouse, murmuring in disbelief. Frankfurt had seen its share of ruins during the war, of graves and bones uncovered in rubble. But this was different. This was intimate, personal, secret. A skeleton bride in a wedding dress, hidden in a family home. Authorities were called. The police, along with historians from the local museum, arrived to examine the scene. They carried the trunk carefully into the daylight. The sight drew gasps from onlookers who pressed close to glimpse the eerie figure. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. Old men crossed themselves. Forensic specialists confirmed what the eye already knew. This was no recent death. The remains were at least a century old, possibly more. The fabric of the gown, though fragile, suggested mid-19th century design. The shoes, too, matched a style popular in the 1850s. But the greater question loomed over everyone. Why was she here? This was not a burial ground. This was not a church crypt. This was a private home, and she had been hidden, sealed away deliberately. Whoever placed her there had gone to great effort to conceal her existence. And so, speculation began. Some whispered that she had been murdered. Perhaps a jealous fiancé, or a family enraged at her choice of husband. Others claimed she had died suddenly before her wedding day, and the family, unable to bear the shame, hid her away rather than let the scandal be known. Still others suggested darker rituals, strange practices from a superstitious past. Whatever the truth, the discovery was a blow to the neighborhood. Houses that had stood for centuries, passed down through generations, suddenly seemed less like homes and more like silent vaults of secrets. Each cracked beam and shadowed corner might have hidden its own ghost. For the workers who found her, the image would never leave their minds. One described later that he could still see the outline of her veil every time he closed his eyes, resting where her face once had been. Another swore he smelled faded perfume clinging to the fabric when the trunk first opened, though others insisted it was only mildew and dust. The skeleton bride, as she was soon called, became the talk of Frankfurt. Newspapers carried the story. Radio programs speculated. People traveled from nearby towns just to see the house, to point at the attic window and whisper. Children dared one another to walk past after dark, yet amid the excitement and gossip, a quieter, heavier question settled over the city. Who had she been? She had once been flesh and blood, a young woman with a family, dreams, and a future. She had stood before a mirror and admired her gown, perhaps nervous, perhaps joyful. And somehow, instead of walking down the aisle, she had been placed into a trunk her wedding dress, becoming her shroud dot in that attic. Sealed away from light, she had waited. Not for hours, not for days, but for more than 100 years. What thoughts filled her mind in her final moments? Was it terror, betrayal, or resignation? Did she know she would never see the church bells ring, never hold the hand of her beloved, never step into the life that awaited her? The discovery opened wounds, not only of curiosity, but of empathy. The women of Frankfurt, especially the older ones, shook their heads sadly. They remembered their own mothers' and grandmothers' stories of strict families, forbidden romances, and marriages arranged without consent. Could this skeleton bride have been one of those unfortunate souls her voice silenced, her life traded for reputation? For the authorities, however, the case had to be approached carefully. A skeleton hidden in a trunk raised the question of crime. But how could they investigate a death that had happened more than a century earlier? There were no witnesses left, no suspects, no living relatives who could provide answers. What they had was a body, a dress, a trunk, and silence. The house itself, with its timber beams and sagging roof, seemed to press down heavier after the discovery. The family that once lived there had long since moved on, their names blurred in the city's registries. But the walls, it seemed, had remembered. They had kept her secret, and now, after so many years, that secret was out. The skeleton bride of Frankfurt was no longer hidden. She had stepped quietly, hauntingly back into history. And with her return, the city began to search for the story she had carried with her to the grave. Her mystery was just beginning. Asterisk. The discovery of the skeleton bride sent ripples of unease through Frankfurt. What had started as a simple renovation project now became the center of a growing mystery. Police cordoned off the townhouse, its creaking beams and weathered facade drawing more attention than ever before. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering as uniformed officers carried evidence bags and notebooks into the dim interior. Forensic specialists, though limited by the era's technology, began their careful work. The bones were examined first. They confirmed what the eye already suggested. The remains belonged to a young woman, most likely in her early 20s at the time of death. Her bones bore no clear signs of violent trauma. No fractures, no blade marks, no obvious blows. She had not been struck down in a fit of passion. Instead, her end appeared quieter, hidden in mystery. The dress, fragile and frayed, offered its own silent clues. Conservators from the City Museum carefully unfolded the brittle fabric, noting the design of the lace sleeves and the cut of the bodice. It was undeniably mid-19th century, the kind of gown a woman from a well-to-do family would wear on her wedding day. The shoes, two delicate leather slippers, were not cheap. Whoever she had been, she was not poor. But how had a wealthy bride-to-be ended up locked in a trunk in the attic of her family home? Investigators turned to the house itself for answers. Built in the early 1800s, it had once belonged to a prosperous merchant family. Their records showed ownership passed through several generations, until the devastation of the Second World War forced many heirs to sell or abandon their properties. The house had stood empty for years before finally being purchased for renovation in the 1970s. Historians were called in to comb through civic records, marriage registers, and parish archives. Yet the paper trail was thin. Fires, wars, and neglect had swallowed countless documents over the decades. Still, there were whispers of a daughter belonging to one of the merchant families, a young woman who had vanished mysteriously before her wedding. Her name, however, remained elusive. The city's memories were as faded as the gown she wore. As news spread, elderly residents of the district began to recall fragments of family stories. One old man claimed his grandmother had once spoken of a bride who disappeared on her wedding morning, leaving her groom waiting in vain at the church. Another swore there was gossip of a family disgrace, of a daughter who ran off with a soldier and was never seen again. But these were only whispers, unreliable after so many generations. The police pressed on. They examined the trunk closely, noting how carefully it had been sealed. The wood had been reinforced, the latch secured, and the entire chest hidden behind attic panels that required effort to remove. This was no accident. Whoever had placed her there had intended that she never be found. But why? Speculation began to swirl not only among neighbors, but in the offices of the investigators themselves. Some officers leaned toward the idea of a scandal covered up by the family. A daughter who had fallen pregnant out of wedlock, or who had tried to elope with a man deemed unsuitable. In such cases, family honor often outweighed compassion. Could it be that she had died, whether by her own hand or by some cruel arrangement, and the family decided to conceal the shame forever? Others suggested something darker. Perhaps she had been deliberately silenced. Though her bones bore no clear marks of violence, poisoning was not uncommon in the 19th century. If she had been poisoned, no trace would remain after so many years. The image of a young woman, poisoned and then dressed in her bridal gown before being hidden away, chilled even the most hardened officers. The investigation reached beyond the house. Historians painted a broader picture of Frankfurt in the mid-1800s. It was a city in flux, caught between tradition and modernity. Families of wealth and position guarded their reputations fiercely. Marriages were often strategic, arranged to secure alliances or preserve fortunes. A daughter's duty was clear: to marry as instructed, to uphold the family's honor. Love, passion, or independence rarely factored into the equation. In this world, the skeleton bride's fate began to take shape. If she had resisted her family's plans, or if she had dared to choose a love forbidden to her, the consequences could have been severe. Families could be ruthless in preserving appearances. A scandal could destroy business ties, tarnish reputations, or invite gossip that lingered for decades. And so, investigators returned again and again to one unsettling conclusion: The skeleton bride had been a victim not only of death, but of silence. She had been hidden not merely because she had died, but because her story was not meant to be told. The house itself seemed to conspire in her secrecy. As officers walked its creaking floors, they noted how many corners remained untouched by time. The attic, especially, was a place of shadows, its beams sagging under centuries of weight. One officer remarked that standing in that attic felt as though the house itself had been complicit guarding its secret, refusing to let it go until the day the boards were pried apart. But for all their efforts, the authorities could not move the case forward. No living relatives could be found. No clear records tied the remains to a specific family member. The gown, though beautiful, could not name its wearer. And so, after months of inquiry, the official investigation was forced to a standstill. Still, the story refused to fade. Journalists kept it alive, weaving the discovery into headlines that captured imaginations far beyond Frankfurt. Readers in other German cities, and even across Europe, shivered at the thought of a skeleton bride waiting silently in an attic for more than a century. For the people of Frankfurt, the case became part of local folklore almost overnight. Children asked their grandparents if they had heard the story before. Tourists wandered the streets, pointing out the townhouse with wide eyes. The image of the skeleton bride was etched into the city's identity, a haunting reminder that beneath the cobblestones and timber frames, history was layered with secrets. Yet for all the curiosity and fascination, there remained a weight of sorrow. The investigators, though hardened by years of work, admitted privately that this case troubled them more than most. It was not merely the sight of bones, it was the life that had been denied, the voice that had been silenced. One officer, interviewed years later, confessed. It was the dress. That was what I could never forget. To see bones in a coffin is one thing. To see bones in a wedding gown is another. It speaks of a life interrupted, of a joy that never came. That's what haunted me. Historians continued their search in the archives, hoping for some shred of evidence, a missing person's notice, a church record, a diary entry. But the past remained stubbornly quiet. Wars had burned countless documents. Families had died out, leaving no heirs to preserve their stories. The skeleton bride, it seemed, would remain nameless. But though her name was lost, her presence was undeniable. In the silence of that attic, she had waited. And in being found, she forced the world to look back, to confront the hidden corners of history where voices, especially women's voices, had been buried. The investigation had ended. The files were closed. But the questions only grew louder. Who was she? What had happened to her? And why had she been left to vanish into dust, only to return as a skeleton wrapped in lace? As Frankfurt pondered these questions, a darker current began to take hold. Theories, legends, ghost stories whispered in taverns and told at bedtime. The official investigation may have stalled, but in the hearts of the people, the skeleton bride story was just beginning to take on a life of its own. Asterisk. The official investigation may have ended in silence, but among the people of Frankfurt, the story of the skeleton bride only grew louder. With no clear identity and no explanation for her fate, speculation took root, and soon the city was buzzing with theories. Each one painted a different picture, tragic, horrifying, or even supernatural. Though no one could say for certain who she was, the possibilities told much about the fears and values of the time. And as these tales spread from neighbor to neighbor, from family tables to late-night tavern conversations, the skeleton bride transformed from mere bones in a trunk to a living legend. Asterisk. The most commonly whispered tale was one of heartbreak. It was said that the skeleton bride had been the daughter of a wealthy merchant. Her wedding day had been arranged, whether by love or by duty, no one could say. But on the morning she was to wed, she vanished. Her groom was left waiting at the church, humiliated, his guests unsettled by the scandal. According to this story, the young bride had suffered a sudden tragedy. Some claimed she fell ill, collapsing in her bridal chamber just before she was to leave. Others believed she had succumbed to despair, perhaps unwilling to marry the man chosen for her dot in this version. The family, terrified of disgrace, chose not to bury her in the churchyard. To admit her death on her wedding day would invite gossip, questions, even suspicion of foul play. Instead, they locked her in the attic, still in her gown, entombing her in silence. It was a cruel choice, but one that reflected the power of honor in 19th century society. A family's reputation could not be stained, even if it meant erasing the life of their own daughter. For many, this theory struck the deepest chord. It spoke of love lost, of duty enforced, and of the heavy weight of tradition that too often smothered women of the era. Others believed her end was far darker. This theory suggested murder, perhaps at the hands of a jealous lover or a rejected suitor. Imagine a young woman, radiant in her gown, preparing for her big day. A man spurned, furious, confronts her in secret. Words are exchanged, voices rise, and in a moment of passion, he takes her life. But how to hide the crime? A family, desperate to prevent scandal, might have chosen to conceal the body, to dress her as a bride even after death, to place her in the trunk, to wall her away behind the panels. By doing so, they preserved appearances while ensuring that no outsider would ever know the truth. Theory grew legs because of the eerie care with which she was placed. She had not been dumped or discarded. She had been arranged, clothed, and sealed. It was almost ceremonial, as though whoever hid her away wanted her to remain forever frozen as a bride. A crime of passion, some whispered, covered by a family that valued secrecy more than justice. In another telling, the skeleton bride was not a victim of illness or violence, but of her own defiance. Marriage in the 19th century was often a transaction. Families arranged unions to secure wealth or status, and daughters were expected to obey. But what if this bride had refused? What if she had fallen in love with someone her family despised, a man of lower class, a soldier, perhaps even a foreigner? The story imagines her standing in her gown, trembling but resolute, declaring she would not marry the man chosen for her. For a family of status, such defiance was unthinkable. The shame of a runaway bride could destroy their reputation. Some whispered that her family, enraged, locked her away in punishment. Perhaps they intended only to keep her hidden until the scandal passed. But days turned to weeks, and weeks to months. Alone, starving, she wasted away in her wedding clothes. By the time remorse or fear drove them to act, it was too late. The attic, in this version, became her prison and the trunk her coffin. This theory carried a cruel logic. In a time when obedience was demanded, a woman's independence could be her undoing. And so the skeleton bride became a symbol not of love lost, but of freedom denied. Some whispered of poison. In this telling, the young woman had enemies within her own household. Perhaps her parents sought to prevent a union they despised. Perhaps a jealous sibling coveted her inheritance. Or perhaps even the groom himself, fearing betrayal, slipped a bitter draught into her cup. The eerie absence of wounds on her bones made this theory compelling. Poison leaves no trace after a century. A vial of arsenic, a sip of laudanum mixed with wine any, could have ended her life quietly. In this imagining, her death was not sudden but slow. She might have felt dizzy, weak, collapsing before her attendants as the poison took hold. She may even have known, in her final moments, that she had been betrayed by someone she trusted. The family, once again, would have faced a dilemma. Announce her death and invite suspicion or hide it, burying the evidence with her body. The trunk became not only a grave, but a cover --. Not all theories were rooted in crime or scandal. Some reached into the realm of superstition. In the old traditions of Europe, strange practices sometimes arose to ward off misfortune. Tales spoke of bride sacrifices, where a symbolic figure was hidden away to protect a household from evil spirits. Could the skeleton bride have been part of such a ritual? In this version, she was not hidden in shame, but offered as a talisman, her bridal form meant to guard the home. Dressed in white, sealed in wood, she became a spectral protector, though at the cost of her own life. Few truly believed this tale, but it spread nonetheless, for it explained the most chilling detail of all: why she remained in her gown. Why else would a woman be left in bridal dress, unless it was meant to hold some symbolic power? For those inclined toward the supernatural, the skeleton bride was no mere victim. She was a ghost bound to the house, a spirit trapped in lace and bone. Another story, more tragic still, imagined that she had hidden herself. A young woman, faced with a marriage she did not want, may have sought escape. She climbed into the trunk herself, perhaps to stage her own disappearance. She may have planned to emerge later, when the household was quiet, to run away with her secret lover. But what if the latch closed tighter than she expected? What if she could not open it again? In this telling, she perished in darkness, her cries unheard, her hopes of escape turning to terror. Her bridal dress meant for joy became her burial shroud. This version was whispered by children in hushed tones, for it played on their deepest fear, to be trapped, unheard, and forgotten. Each theory, whether of crime, scandal, or superstition, revealed not only possibilities of her fate, but truths about the society she lived in. The skeleton bride may never speak, but the stories told about her spoke volumes about the world of 19th century Frankfurt. A world where family honor outweighed compassion, where women's choices were constrained by duty, where secrets mattered more than truth. Whether she was murdered, silenced, punished, or simply forgotten, her story became a mirror reflecting the fears, cruelties, and values of her time. As the years passed, these theories became legends. Guides whispered them to tourists in hushed voices, embellishing the details with every retelling. Children dared one another to glance at the attic window, swearing they saw a shadow in white lace. Some claimed the house was haunted. Tenants who moved in after the renovation reported strange sounds in the night: the creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric, the faint brush of footsteps overhead. One woman swore she saw a figure in a veil passing across her mirror, vanishing when she turned. Whether ghost or memory, the skeleton bride lingered in Frankfurt, not just in the attic where she was found, but in the imagination of a city that could not let her go. Her body had been sealed in silence for a century, but once discovered, her story refused to die. Theories abounded, legends multiplied, and whispers turned her into something larger than life. She was no longer just bones in a gown. She was tragedy embodied. She was fear, longing, shame, and defiance woven into one haunting figure. And so, as the investigation closed and the years rolled on, the skeleton bride became not only a mystery, but a symbol. A symbol of how the past hides its darkest truths, waiting for the day they break through the dust and demand to be remembered. Time moved on, as it always does. The investigators retired, the case files gathered dust in municipal archives, and the merchant's townhouse was finally restored into something new: an office space, a shopfront, another piece of the city's endlessly turning wheel. Yet the skeleton bride remained. Not her bones, which were respectfully preserved in the care of Frankfurt's historical authorities, but her story. Her image lingered in the minds of all who had heard it. For the people of Frankfurt, the skeleton bride became more than a grim discovery. She became a mirror, a reminder of how fragile life once was, and how unforgiving the rules of family, society, and reputation could be. Some spoke of her with fear, shivering at the thought of a young woman sealed away in silence. Others spoke with sorrow, imagining the dreams she must have carried as she stepped into her wedding gown. A gown meant for joy, for laughter, for a beginning, not for an ending. Local schools began to mention the tale in history lessons. Teachers used it as an example of how women's stories were often erased, hidden behind the decisions of others. Museums quietly referenced the case in exhibitions about 19th century Frankfurt, displaying bridal gowns from the era under dim glass lights. Visitors lingered at those displays, imagining for themselves what it must have been like to prepare for a wedding day that would never come. Writers and folklorists also took up the skeleton bride story. Poems were written about her, plays staged in small theaters, and novels inspired by her tragic fate. Each retelling filled the silence with imagined details, her name, her face, her final thoughts. Though none could claim the truth, these creations gave her a kind of life she had been denied in her own time. The very act of storytelling became a defiance against the silence that had once bound her. This legend grew so strong that some claimed to see her still. A faint figure in white drifting past attic windows on stormy nights, or a soft knocking echoing from behind closed walls. Children dared one another to walk past the townhouse after dark, whispering about the skeleton bride who had waited so long to be found. Even adults admitted that the thought of her presence brought a chill when they walked the narrow lanes near the old house. But beyond folklore, the skeleton bride came to represent something deeper about memory itself. History, after all, is not only about dates and battles and kings. It is also about the forgotten, the nameless faces, the silenced voices, the lives cut short and then hidden away. In this sense, the skeleton bride is not alone. She stands for countless others whose stories were lost to neglect, to shame, or to the simple indifference of time. Some scholars compared her to other hidden women of European history. Cases where skeletons were found in walls, or bodies left sealed in family homes. Again and again, these discoveries revealed how easily the vulnerable could be erased from the public record, and how only chance allowed them to speak again. It was a sobering lesson, one that historians used to remind their audiences of the importance of listening for what is missing, not only what is present. In the archives of the past in Frankfurt, her story inspired new questions about how families lived, what they valued, and what they feared. Was her death an accident covered up to protect a reputation? Was it the act of a desperate family, unable to accept her choices? Or was it something darker, a secret crime carried out under the roof of respectability? These questions could never be answered with certainty, but they gave shape to the city's understanding of itself. A city of progress, but also a city built on silence and sacrifice. And so the skeleton bride, though nameless, became unforgettable. She became part of Frankfurt's identity, stitched into the fabric of its collective memory like the lace of her gown. Whenever people spoke of her, they gave her something she had been denied in life, a voice, however faint, carried on through time. Her story reached beyond Germany, too. Newspapers in America, Britain, and France reprinted accounts of the discovery. Readers across the Atlantic were struck by the image of a bride hidden in an attic trunk, and letters poured into editorial offices speculating on her fate. In the United States, where many immigrants traced their families back to Germany, some even wondered if the skeleton bride might have been a distant relative. Her story connected continents, bridging the gaps between past and present, here and there, life and death. For older generations in particular, her tale stirred something profound. Many had lived through times when secrets were kept, when family reputations mattered more than truth. They knew, perhaps too well, how easily young women's lives could be shaped or shattered by forces beyond their control. To them, the skeleton bride was not only a relic of the past, she was a reminder of choices they had witnessed, of silences they had endured. In the end, perhaps that is why her story endures. Because she is not merely a mystery to be solved. She is a symbol of what it means to be forgotten and of the power of rediscovery. She reminds us that even in silence, stories wait to be heard. That beneath the dust of history lie voices still reaching out, asking to be remembered. And when we remember, we give them a kind of life again. As we close her story, imagine the attic where she was found. For decades, it stood in darkness, the chest sealed, the air thick with the weight of secrecy. Then one day, a hammer struck wood, and light poured in where none had shone for more than a century. The truth was revealed, not fully, not perfectly, but enough. Enough for us to know she lived, and that her life mattered. The skeleton bride may never have her name restored, but she has something else. She has us. Our voices, our remembrance, our willingness to keep telling her story. And perhaps that is the greatest justice history can offer. Not silence, but remembrance.